approaching North Broadway, Hispanic male, red shirt running southbound along Broadway behind the businesses operating north.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Doug Nolte, and welcome to this edition of Behind the Badge. Today we're going to be exploring all about the air section. With me is pilot and commander of the air section, Paul Shields. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Doug. Real pleasure.
Well, I'll tell you, we're sitting out here in Jabara Airport, and we're sitting in the police department helicopter. And before we really get into the helicopter, you know, how is it that the police department has a air section? When did that kind of come into being? And tell us a little bit about the history.
Sure. Well, it's kind of an interesting story, Doug. The police department implemented its helicopter program in 1970. And at that time, we were one of only 13 units that had a formalized police helicopter patrol program in the United States. In fact, we were one of the original 13 alumni members of Operation Sky Night, which was the first formal police helicopter patrol program as implemented by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in Lakewood, California in 1966. So we've been around a while, and last year we celebrated our 40th anniversary of...
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I bet you the helicopter that we're sitting in is a little bit nicer than the ones that they started with, but kind of in that history, how many different helicopters has the police department had?
Not that many. Originally, from its inception up to 2003, we flew a two-seat piston-powered helicopter. And also, interestingly, this particular helicopter was made by the same company as the previous fleet. And that was the Hughes Aircraft and Tool Company, a company owned by Howard Hughes and based out of Culver City, California.
Well, we're sitting in now probably the most expensive piece of equipment that the police department or the city of Wichita probably owns. What kind of helicopter are we sitting in?
Well, it's made by a company called MD Helicopters, and they're based out of Mesa, Arizona. And this is their MD 500E. It's a light single-turbine powered helicopter. Seats 4, pilot, co-pilot, has a rear cabin to accommodate 2 rear seat passengers.
Okay. Now, in terms of when law enforcement goes and looks at a helicopter to fly, what sort of things are important for you guys to have when you're flying? I mean, this is it looks pretty sporty, but it probably has a lot of utility as well.
Oh, it does. In fact, when we acquired the helicopter in 2003, some of the primary factors that we took into account were the initial acquisition cost. Equally as important was the ongoing direct operating cost, projected maintenance costs, and then also very important to us was the performance. What kind of aircraft performance do we get for the dollar that we're spending?
And since we've had it, what do you think? Pretty good deal?
There's no doubt that everybody is extremely well pleased with the aircraft and the support that we've received from the manufacturer. You know, it's an extremely fast helicopter, very agile, maneuverable, and just excellent for what we do most of the time.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the specifications of the helicopter. I know that one of the things that is very, very important is for you to be up on things like car chases.
Sure.
And those things can, and anyone in law enforcement knows, can get pretty fast. So speed-wise, obviously you want to have something that can keep up or outpace something like that. Does this thing get pretty fast?
Oh yeah, with a tailwind helping us. You know, we've had ground speeds in excess of 200 miles an hour on many occasions, and you're absolutely right. Speed, critical. It's very important for us when we're trying to manage a vehicle pursuit to be able to keep up with the vehicle that's fleeing from the officers, and then that allows us to take over control of the pursuit and allows the ground units to turn their lights and siren off and to just completely drop out of the situation entirely.
Which helps keep it safe. But you know, another thing that people might not realize is that speed also helps, because we're kind of a sprawling town.
Absolutely.
How long does it take to get from one side of Wichita to the other if you got favorable conditions?
Yeah, we've timed it before, and no matter what direction you want to cut it, it's only a matter of a few short minutes. And in fact, we're the first unit on scene on almost a full 100% of all the calls we respond to.
Well, that's pretty impressive. And I know from being in the patrol ranks, man, we love having you be able to get up there and kind of give us an eye on what's going on before we get there, because it does give us that measure of safety moving in. Well, when we talk about safety and things like that, you guys have been involved in not only helping Wichita but surrounding areas. Can you kind of tell on a regular or daily basis kind of what the shift is like for the pilots and for the tactical flight officers? What do you try to have them do?
Well, we do a lot with the helicopter, but the primary emphasis is on trying to support officers assigned to the field at the operational level, i.e. uniform patrol. And of course, their safety is by far and away the most important of all things that we take into account. Typically on a day shift, we'll try to go up on a couple of rotations, fly for a few hours out of the shift, and at nighttime, same thing. We try to go up for several rotations for several hours of flight. And then when we're not actually actively flying, we're here at the office monitoring the radio. If we hear a call for service or a request for assistance that we think we might be able to assist with, then we scramble to the helicopter and respond immediately.
Well, it brings up a great question. How long does it take for you guys to be in the office to scramble and be flying to get to a call? How long does that take?
Sure. I mean, typically it's 2 to 3 minutes from our base of operations here at Jabara Airport. But one of the reasons that we try to fly as much as we can during the daytime and nighttime is because we place a high premium on proactive patrol. And we find that when we're already airborne, when these 911 calls come out, that we're typically on scene within seconds to maybe just a couple of short minutes.
Can you tell us, people obviously know from television and news the car chases, but what are some of the other calls that you typically make that are kind of fascinating or interesting that people might not realize?
Well, I'm not sure how interesting they may be, but to be honest with you, there is hardly a single call that we won't respond to. Now, when we're flying, we're simultaneously listening to several main operating radio channels at the same time, and as calls are broadcast, we're prioritizing them in terms of their sense of urgency or their emergency nature, and then we're responding accordingly. But, you know, Doug, as well as I do, there's just no way to know anything about the specifics or the dynamics of any given call. I mean, a disturbance could turn out to be something way more serious than it sounds. Something so simple as a traffic accident could turn out to be a hit and run with injuries, maybe involving a DUI driver. You just don't know. And in fact, we'll even respond to calls such as traffic hazards or debris in the roadway on the Kellogg flyover, for example. We'd like to try to get up there, find the issue, advise the officers en route, let them know where to get on Kellogg at, where to position their car, maybe have other officers come up to assist them to set up a traffic brake because of the heavy traffic that's typically up on the flyover. So yeah, it's pretty much everything from A to Z, really.
Well, and I know that you've been involved in looking for lost juveniles or lost adults. I mean, really, you said it when you said you guys can pretty much go to any call and be useful. And again, that's when we talk about just the myriad of calls that police respond to. It's nice to know you guys are up there. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit just to talk about personnel and how many pilots are there that are flying for the air section?
Sure. Well, currently we have 5 full-time personnel assigned to the unit, and that consists of 2 pilots and 2 tactical flight officers or observers. And then we also have a full-time in-house civilian mechanic.
Now, what do you guys do when the helicopter maybe has a mechanical issue or you're doing an inspection? Do you guys fly or what happens?
Sure. Well, the maintenance inspections are all based on 100 hours of flying. So every 100-hour interval that comes up in terms of flight time, the helicopter has to be downed and removed from service so that our mechanic can do a scheduled maintenance inspection. And typically what we do during the downtime is assist him with the inspections. Unfortunately, when we are down for maintenance, currently our fleet consists of just the 1 helicopter, so we have no fallback. There's just strictly no air support during that time until we can complete the inspection and then return the helicopter to service.
Paul, when you guys are flying this helicopter, and we've talked about just what all is involved in the circumstance of it, but there is a lot of stuff. And you commented when we were talking right before about how you kind of divide things up. And it sounds like there's some really complicated or some challenges that you as a pilot have to navigate. I think about being on patrol, and we've got radios that we're listening to on the ground, and you've indicated you listen to them, but you've also got to be listening up in the sky forward because you're flying an aircraft. Sure. And those. So how do you deal with all that? What do you do as a pilot? Because you're obviously not just taking off and flying level. You're doing a lot of different kinds of flying. Sure.
Well, it's not recreational flying, and it's certainly not flying from point A to point B. Very challenging, a tremendous amount of multitasking involved, and as you alluded to, we do try to divide the duties and responsibilities up. We basically divide the cockpit in half. The pilot is responsible for the obvious, safely flying the aircraft, trying to get to where the TFO tells him he needs to be in order to work the call, and then the TFO on his side, he's talking to the police dispatcher, the responding ground units. He's operating the searchlight, the camera, the thermal imager, and actually coordinating the activities on the ground.
Okay. So you can't just, this is something you've got, how long have you been flying? You've been flying how many years now?
15 plus years.
In 15 years, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience, but man, what was it like that first flight you took? Had to be somewhat nerve-wracking knowing that you had to come in and operate so many different things.
Oh, sure. There's no question about it. Like I say, very challenging, always a lot going on. And typically when we're up flying on patrol, we're listening to multiple channels on the police radio, the pilot's listening to air traffic control radio. He's also talking to his partner through the intercom system back and forth. So there's an awful lot always going on at the same time.
Well, Paul, thanks for today for giving us kind of a tour and sitting in here and kind of talking to us. I tell you, I personally, from on the police department and using your all service in the air, it's certainly valuable to the officers. But I think sometimes the citizens don't realize how valuable it is as just a service to the city. So thanks for your work. I think what we're going to do is we're going to go track down one of the tactical flight officers and maybe even your mechanic and find out a little bit more about the air section.
Thanks, Doug. Good to be with you.
Well, with me right now is Dave Fry. Dave is the mechanic for our Air Sections helicopter. Dave, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the helicopter. You maintain it, and you kind of know probably pretty much everything that goes on with it. And you're going to take me on a kind of a pre-flight. Is that right?
It's a daily inspection that I do every morning before the crew starts their flight.
Okay.
And I generally start back here at the back and just work my way forward. And I have a routine that I go through, and the reason that I start at the back is the tail rotor is the most important aspect of this helicopter.
Okay.
One of them.
Doesn't look real big, but it looks pretty.
But the tail rotor turns at 3,000 RPM.
Wow.
And the main rotor turns at about 500. When the helicopter's flying over, what you're hearing is this tail rotor because it's turning so fast. What I'm looking for when I do my daily is I'm looking for any bearing that might be worn. Now these are supposed to rotate. I also look to make sure that there's no catching in all the mechanisms, but simply pushing on this and I can tell that it's smooth, it doesn't drag or catch or anything. Also we want to rotate and make sure that they haven't hit a bird or a rock or something, so you're going to look at the blades for integrity, make sure there's no dents in them, make sure no rivets are missing.
Because that really is kind of a critical
This
component.
is very, very critical to the safety of the helicopter. It's also very dangerous because as you see, it's here where people can be in contact with us. So we really guard this end of the helicopter very carefully because it is very dangerous as well. And then you just we look for like I say, main thing is bird strikes. Anything that might be missing that's evident of and the thing about doing a daily inspection is that you don't want to be afraid to touch it. You want to touch it, shake it. Is it loose? Make sure everything has a safety on a helicopter, and sometimes 2 or 3 safeties. So you're looking at all the safeties. You're looking at your weights. because we have to balance this tail rotor every 100 hours when we do one of our inspections. We balance the tail rotor.
Okay.
And we balance the tail rotor with the machine, and it balances it for IPS, and IPS stands for inches per second of vibration. And we put a gauge on here that measures that. And the integrity of the tail rotor, a lot of it is how balanced it is. The better you get it balanced, the longer this is going to last.
I see. Well, okay, so we're talking pretty complex things. It must take a little bit of time. Not just anybody can walk back here and look what they're looking at. What kind of training did you have to be able to do this?
I went to K-State in Salina for 2 years.
Okay.
And then I took another course, just helicopters, for 6 months. Then I went to the Gulf went to work for petroleum helicopters, which was they had a lot of helicopters, so a lot of good experience. They put you through about 6 months of just hands-on, but right with another mechanic to make sure that he helps get you started, and that's how I started my career.
Yeah.
So about 3 years.
How much more complex, because obviously being the air capital, we know that we've got lots of airplanes around, but when you talk about, and just looking at this and seeing and hearing your explanation, how much more complex is a helicopter than just and I don't want to say run-of-the-mill aircraft, but just a fixed-wing aircraft in general?
Well, the helicopter is very critical. Everything on the helicopter is very critical, as is an airplane. But an airplane, I guess the thing that is about an airplane, it has a glide ratio that you can glide somewhere. A helicopter you can't glide. So if something happens,
fails, you're coming down.
You're coming down, and you're coming down pretty fast. It's not that you're out of control, but you're steep. Your descent is very steep. Also, the fact that there's so many bearings on this thing and so many things turning, it all has to work together, and any one little thing can just disrupt the whole thing. So that's why we're very careful to look at every little bearing, every little component of this helicopter.
Well, it sounds like if you have to get not only the big blades but the rotor going, you could probably have to have a pretty good-sized engine to power that up. Can we take a look at that?
Sure. This is an Allison 250 C20B, 435 horse.
Okay.
It's a turbine engine.
Now, when you say horsepower turbine engine, can you define what does that relate to? Is it like a jet engine? Is it like your car engine?
It's not like a jet engine in so much as a lot of people think that they get thrust from here.
Right.
This is like a turbo prop.
Okay.
So the thrust, the jet part of this is actually turning the rotor instead of thrusting. So it gets its power from the thrust turning a wheel, not coming out the back like a jet would be.
Okay. So now I noticed that it looks kind of like it's sitting at an angle. Why does it do that?
Well, that's partly the design, but also it's lined up with the transmission, and we can go and look on the inside to see how it goes up with the transmission. It's all lined up so that it goes direct drive straight into the transmission instead of having a U-joint that's on an angle. Okay. Because this engine's turning at 9,500 RPM.
Okay, so
we're over 9,000.
3 times the amount.
So you want to keep that much speed pretty much in line with what it's turning.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of room for air there. Sure.
Right.
How often do you have to take apart and service the engine? Is that done on regular intervals, or how do you determine when you need to look at all that stuff?
Well, every 100 hours we follow a 100-hour inspection checklist, and it just looks at a lot of just the small stuff. Mm-hmm. I could go into detail, but it just looks at like chip plugs, fuel nozzle. You're looking for oil leaks, stuff like that. So you're not doing a lot of disassembly. It's mainly visual. You are taking out some chip plugs. Turbine engines have magnetic chip plugs throughout the oil system that if a bearing fails, it collects particles and it turns the light on, and the cockpit tells the pilot, something's happened, you need to land.
Okay.
So it's a safety thing.
Well, we can talk to the pilots, but there's probably not a whole lot of time between when something goes on in the cockpit that lets them know something's wrong and when they have to put the helicopter on the ground.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, really, you're their best friend, aren't you?
Well, they don't make me mad, okay?
There you go. You get nice Christmas gifts, I'm sure. Well, Dave, when we look at the pod here, I call it a pod. It's a FLIR system, and can you explain? This is kind of one of the most critical systems that we utilize, or that you all utilize. Tell us a little bit about what this strange-looking thing is.
Well, this is a very valuable piece of equipment for the police department in several aspects. It's a forward-looking infrared. That's what FLIR is.
Okay.
It also has a day camera and a laser. Now that's a low-power laser, so it's not like it's going to...
We're not zapping things out of the sky.
Right, we're not zapping things out of the sky. But since it's a laser, as you'll see up there, we have to have a lockout to lock it out.
Okay.
But the day camera is used during the day, obviously, at low light. The FLIR camera is used at night, and it's all run through a couple of computers in the back and run through monitors up front. Okay. And a hand controller.
Okay.
It's quite complicated to run this thing. I'm a pilot as well, and to me, it's easier to fly this helicopter than it is to run this.
Okay.
Especially when you're in a chase at night in a hard turn, and you're trying to keep this with a little joystick on a car that's going through the neighborhood. It's not what as easy as it looks.
Sure, yeah. What? Give us an idea of the technology that this is based on. It basically can turn night into day when we talk about FLIR because of how it works.
It works off a heat signature, and if you was inside a building, if your body temperature is 98 degrees, so it's going to show that 98 degree line. But if you're standing out here on tarmac that's 100 degrees in the daytime, it wouldn't see you.
Okay.
So it's based on heat signature temperature is what it's based on, and it also is a very zoom capability. I mean, we're talking from 700 feet looking at a license plate, being able to read it.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this pretty neat machine, and obviously we're very thankful that you work on it for us and keep our pilots and our tactical flight officers and ultimately, our officers and the citizens safe. I appreciate it. And next month we're going to continue on with the air section. We're going to talk to our tactical flight officers and talk a little bit about how they interact with the pilots as well as what their jobs are in terms of running some of these systems. As always, thanks for joining in Behind the Badge. We'll see you next month.